everybody to our third session of Midrash on the Parashah with Rabbi Dr. Lebens. As you come in, I will invite you to become a panelist. That just means you'll be able to turn your camera on and we'll be able to see your lovely faces. And when we pause for questions or comments, it means you'll be able to unmute yourself and speak. While you're not speaking, I just ask you to keep yourself on mute so that there's less background noise and we can all hear each other. And you are very welcome to put your questions and comments in the chat. And if you're joining us on Facebook Live, you can put your questions and comments as a comment and I will bring them to the Zoom. And over to you.
Hello. Thanks, Linas. So we are entering Parashat Terumah. And let me present to you how the Torah itself presents the sequence of events leading up to and including this Parashah and indeed the next, and indeed a little bit into Parashat Ki-Tisa. What we know is, if we just follow the sequence of events as narrated, Moses went up the mountain. That was at the end of Parashat Mishpatim. He stays there for 40 days and 40 nights. While he's up there, and it seems like he's up there, so to speak, during the readings of this week, Terumah, and next week, Tetzaveh, and even a little bit of Parashat Ki-Tisa. While he's up there, 40 days and 40 nights, he receives the commandment to build a tabernacle. That's a portable temple in the desert. Also, while he's up there, receiving all of these instructions, the Jewish people build and worship a golden calf. Now, we're not told about that until later, but I'm just presenting you the sequence of events as they seem to be presented by the narrative. Moses, therefore, had to come down the mountain to deal with it, breaking the tablets of stone in the process, before going up again to secure atonement on behalf of the people. Then, if you're following, he comes back down the mountain one more time with a second set of tablets, and finally the people start to build the tabernacle after that rude interruption. Okay, that's the way the sequence of events is described, and that's how it was understood by many of the rabbinic commentaries. Nachmanides and even Ezra follow the chronology. That's to say, they argue that the order in which these events are presented is the order in which they happened, and therefore the description I've given you of the order of events is accurate. And if you look at the handout, I start with Nachmanides. In something of an introduction he gives to the Parashah, he says, "Kasher diber Hashem im Yisrael panim bepanim aseret dibrot." Since God has or had spoken to the Jewish people face to face in the giving of the 10 statements, 10 commandments, v'tziva otam al yidei Moshe, sat mitzvot shehem k'mo avot lemitzvoteya shel Torah, he had given the Jewish people via Moses a kind of précis of the mitzvot in the Torah, like the headlines. And that, by the way, is a reference to Parashat Mishpatim and all of the laws in Parashat Mishpatim. Nachmanides relates to them as something like a précis of their headlines of the mitzvahs of the Torah. Kasher hanhigu rabotenu im hagerim shebayim lahit yahed. Right? Nachmanides says this is similar to what we do with prospective converts. When a prospective convert comes to the rabbi to convert to Judaism, according to the Gemara in Masechet Yevamot, sadly, not according to most rabbinical courts today, whose practices are much more, what would the word be, difficult than or more exacting than the practices described in the Talmud. But as described in the Talmud, the rabbis wouldn't teach a prospective convert all of the laws of the Torah. They can learn after they're converted, which is not what we do today, of course. What we do today, at least in the Orthodox community, and I think in many conservative communities, is we demand the prospective convert learns, a huge amount about Jewish law before we allow them to convert. That wasn't the case. what used to be the case is that a convert, according to the Gemara in Yevamot, 47, DAF 47, or folio 47b, as they say in English. According to the Gemara there, the rabbis would just give a prospective convert the highlights, and so that's what Nachmanides thinks was happening in Parashat Mishpatim. Moses just gave the Jewish people the highlights. Yisrael kiblu aleihem la'asot kol ma sheyatzum al yado shel Moshe. Right, the Israelites, when they said that famous phrase, which was in last week's Parashah, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear, or we will do and we will heed, or we will do and we will understand, depending on how you translate it. When they said that, they were committing to keep all the other mitzvot, the mitzvot that they hadn't yet heard, the mitzvot that Moshe would later deliver. V'kareti mahem brit al kol zeh, and God, through Moses, sealed a covenant with the Jewish people through this. Me'ata, hinehem lo la'am, v'hu lahem la'elohim. From that moment on, that was when the Jews became God's nation, and God became, so to speak, their God. Like he promised them, I suppose, like he stipulated to them beforehand, where he said, you will be my treasured people if you keep my laws. And he said to the Jewish people, you will be to me a holy kingdom, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. From that moment on, it was fitting that they should have a tabernacle in their midst, because from Parashat Mishpatim onwards, they had accepted the mitzvot, and because they accepted the mitzvot, they became God's special people, and because they were God's special people, they were fitting to have a mishkan in their midst. And then later on, in the same introduction to the Parashah, Nachmanides writes, "V'soda mishkanhu," the secret is, "Sheyeh hakavod asher shachan al har Sinai shochen alav v'nistar." The glory of God, which sat upon Mount Sinai at the Revelation, would sit concealed in a more kind of private, perhaps a more modest way in the tabernacle. I won't read the rest of the Ramban, it's there in your handout if you're interested. The idea, it seems, is that the tabernacle would function as a portable Mount Sinai. Right, you've had Mount Sinai, it was an amazing thing, it was very, very public. Now it's going to move into, as in the Song of Songs, the kind of the erotic metaphor of the Song of Songs is it moves into the chamber, into the bedroom of the king, the chamber or the bedroom of the king. It's the private place, Kadosh Kadoshim, the Holy of Holies, in the middle of the sanctuary, in the middle of the tabernacle. It would become private, but it would become this portable Mount Sinai. And you see the Ibn Ezra, who came before Nachmanides, agrees or preempts Nachmanides. He says, when Moses went up the mountain, first time, at the end of Parashat Mishpatim, at least, that's either the first or the second time, depending on how many times you think he went up there. But at the end of Parashat Mishpatim, when Moses went up the mountain, God told him about the Mishkan. The reason was, God wanted them to make a mikdash, in honor of God's glory, and God would dwell among them. And that's where God would speak to Moshe from now on. He wouldn't have to keep going up the mountain, because now we'll have a Mishkan. So you don't have to keep going to Har Sinai. And indeed, God says, from that point on, when God would speak with Moshe, there's a sense in which the voice would emanate from the tabernacle. So the tabernacle becomes a portable Mount Sinai. Rashi, by contrast, he argues that the sequence of events as described in the Torah is completely and utterly out of order. On Rashi's reading, when Moshe was first on the mountain, he doesn't receive Parshat Truma and Parshat Tetzaveh after Parshat Mishpatim, even though that's what it looks like. He doesn't. On the contrary, he receives all of the other laws of the Torah. He receives everything you could receive except for Parshat Truma and Parshat Tetzaveh. Why? He receives everything the Torah had to say apart from the instruction to create a tabernacle. Then the Jews worshiped the golden calf, forcing Moshe to come down. And it was only on his second time up the mountain in response to the sin of the golden calf, even though that only happens in Parashah Kitisa. It was in his second time up the mountain in response to the sin of the golden calf that Moses received instruction to build a tabernacle. According to Rashi, the tabernacle was a response to sin, right? So according to Rashi, this week's reading is in some sense out of place. The commandment to build the tabernacle is presented this week, before we're told about the sin of the golden calf. But in actual fact, the commandment wasn't really received until after that sin. So let's just have a look at the Rashi. This is on Parashat Yitro. Sorry, that's the fourth source on your handout is from Parashat Yitro. Sorry, this is Rashi on Parashat Kitisa. Okay, so in a few weeks' time. Rashi says, Ein mukdamu mu'uchar b'Torah. There is, which roughly translates as, you shouldn't trust the chronology of the Torah. Or a better translation, perhaps, the order in which the events of the Torah are narrated isn't necessarily the order in which they happen. So the narrative order of the text isn't automatically to be identified with the chronological order of the events that the text describes. That's what Ein Mukdam U'Mu'achar b'Torah means when you unpack it. So Rashi explains, Ma'aseh ha'egel, the incident with the calf, the golden calf, Kodem l'tzivui melechet hamishkan yamim rabim haya. The commandment to make the Mishkan was many, I'm translating it quite really, the commandment to make the Mishkan was many days after the sin of the golden calf, or put better, in more literally, as Rashi says it, the sin of the golden calf was many days before the commandment to build the sanctuary. Shaharei, b'yud zayin b'tamus, shenit abru aluchot. Moses smashed the first tablets of stone upon seeing the golden calf on the 17th of Tammuz, which is, according to the rabbis, one of the reasons we fast on that day. I mean, it's also to do with the breaking of the siege of Jerusalem many, many years later. Uv'yom Kippurim nitratza HaKadosh Baruch Hu liYisrael. And on Yom Kippur, God finally forgave the Israelites for the terrible sin of the golden calf. Ulamacharat, it was on the 11th of Tishrei, the day after Yom Kippur, itchilu b'nedivat hamishkan v'hukam be'echad b'nisan. It was only after the gold that we were being forgiven for the sin of the golden calf that the process of Mishkan building was even thought of and began. Now, I'm just going to look at some things in the chat. ML says that they liked this explanation of conversion and never understood why there's this expectation that converts should learn everything. But they're not allowed to observe Shabbat, of course, because Goyim aren't allowed to observe Shabbat. If people are interested, I hate to be a terrible self-publicist. I'm actually going to be in New York next week. I'll be appearing at the Yeshiva University Sfarim sale, where I'll be flogging my book, A Guide for the Jewish Undecided. And the second chapter of that guide has a long, long tangent into the practice and philosophy of conversion, if people are interested. Anyway, what I've tried to present to you so far is a medieval debate. Are you in Baltimore? Oh, that's a shame. Well, I mean, that's very nice, but it's a shame for these purposes. Right, so we have, I've tried to present you the contours of a medieval debate, but this is a class on Midrash, not medieval commentary. So what am I doing? Well, I hope it will become clear soon, okay? I'm going to give you actually more of this medieval debate because I haven't finished, because it's often presented as if, you know, Rashi's on one side and Ramban on Ibn Ezra on the other side. Actually, Rashi's in the middle, the two extremes, and Nachmanides and Ibn Ezra on one side, and Maimonides on the other extreme, and Rashi is in the middle. And I'll explain what I mean as we move on. Because if you read the text closely, I mean the text of the Torah, through the eyes of Rashi, what emerges is that there was always going to be a Torah-sanctioned sacrificial rite. There was going to be some sort of temple. Why do I say that? Well, immediately after the first revelation at Sinai, before the sin of the golden calf, before Moses goes up the mountain, actually, it was just before the private revelation that we spoke about last week in Parashah Mishpatim. God commanded the Jews to build altars and to sacrifice on them. That is the fourth source on your handout. It's from Parashat Yitro. Make for me an altar of earth, some sort of mud-made altar, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your sacrifices of well-being, your sheep and your oxen. And this is clearly not just for a one-time purpose. It says, you know, in every place where I cause my name to be mentioned, I'll come to you and bless you. So the idea is there's going to be this idea that you build mudden, earthen altars, and you sacrifice upon them all sorts of sacrifices, and God will bless you there. Right? And if you make me an altar of stones, right, you don't have to make it of mud. You could make it of stones, but just don't make it out of hewn stones. There's that whole thing. Okay. Now, this is what I think is going on. On Rashi's reading, it seems that the precious metals, including copious amounts of gold, and the ornate materialism of the tabernacle, they were introduced as a compromise with the human need for a tangible connection, a human need that was all too clearly manifest in the sin of the golden calf. Right? Sacrifice and worship were always going to be mandated in some form or other. It's the razzmatazz of the tabernacle that was new. That was the compromise in wake of the sin of the golden calf. Right? Rashi's reading is therefore, just as I said it would be, a midway point between the more radical positions of Maimonides on the one hand and Nachmanides on the other. What's Maimonides got to say about this? Well, according to Maimonides, the entire institution of animal sacrifice, right, and even the institution of organized worship were commanded as a compromise with the human needs of a particular culture at a particular time. For Rashi, by contrast, it's only the architecture and the choreography of the tabernacle that constitutes a compromise, not the notion of sacrifice itself. Sacrifice was always part of the plan, right? And there's no intimation in Rashi that that was a compromise, right? But if you look at the fifth source in your handout, which is from the Guide to the Perplexed of Maimonides, here I don't provide the Hebrew because it wasn't written in Hebrew. So if I were to provide the Hebrew, that would also be just a translation. The Guide to the Perplexed was written in Judeo-Arabic, okay, which sadly I don't speak. He's talking in this part of the guide. This is section 3, chapter 32, or volume 3, if you like. The Guide to the Perplexed is a book written, so to speak, in 3 volumes. He's talking about the idea that God recognizes that it takes a long time to move a culture and that God addresses us where we are, both individually and communally. He says, for instance, now God sent Moses to make the Israelites a kingdom of priests and a holy nation by means of the knowledge of God. Right? He brings various verses. But the custom, which was in those days general among all men, says Maimonides, and the general mode of worship in which the Israelites were brought up, consisted in sacrificing animals in those temples which contained certain images, to bow down to those images, to burn incense before them. Religious and ascetic persons were in those days the persons that were devoted to the service in the temples erected to the stars, as has been explained by us. It was in accordance with the wisdom and plan of God as displayed in the whole creation that he didn't command us to give up and to discontinue all these manners of service. For to obey such a commandment, it would have been contrary to the nature of man, who generally cleaves to that which he is used. Right? It would in those days have made the same impression as a prophet would make at present if he called us in the service of God and told us in his name that we shouldn't pray to him, that we shouldn't fast, that we shouldn't seek his help in times of trouble, that we should serve him only in thought and not in action. What's interesting is the implication here, and it's more than just an implication if you read elsewhere in the guide, is that really that would be a higher form of worship. A higher form of worship. Maimonides quotes the verse in Psalms that says that silence is praise to you, right? And Maimonides learns from that verse that the highest praise that we could give God is some sort of silent meditation, because all words that you could try, to formulate in praise or worship of God are just inadequate to the task. And silence is actually a much more apt. But we need to pray, at least as we're currently constituted. People with a deeply religious sensibility feel the deep need to pray. So God allows us to, and he even formulates it and tells us what's the right way to do it, what's the wrong way to do it, right? And Maimonides says that in the time in which the Torah was given, just like today, religious people feel a deep need to pray. Back then, they felt a deep need to slaughter animals in the name of God. And had a prophet said, no, don't do that, it would have been as alien to them then as a prophet saying, no, don't pray at all. Don't have any words in your mind. We couldn't do that. And they couldn't do that then. The interesting question is whether or not Maimonides thinks there will be animal sacrifice in the future. And there's a heated scholarly debate about that. I mean, officially, Maimonides seems to think that once something is on the books, it stays on the books forever. So even if it was only introduced as a compromise with a certain time, it doesn't necessarily disappear, in future generations. After all, Maimonides does codify all of the laws of sacrifices in his legal codex. Why did he do that if these laws were never going to be reinstituted? But there's a healthy debate about that. And again, my interest today isn't actually in medieval philosophy, even though I've spent 23 minutes on it. Why? Again, I'm trying to get the contours of this debate, right? For Nachmanides, so you've got Maimonides who says that even the idea of sacrifice was some sort of compromise with humanity, and with a time and a place and a culture. Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi just says that the razzmatazz of the tabernacle, that was a compromise, that God wasn't even going to strike until we committed the sin of the golden calf. And after he forgave us, he gave us the razzmatazz of the tabernacle. And then you got Nachmanides and the Ibn Ezra, who just read the Torah in line with a simple sequential reading of the narrative, the prose. There's no part of the tabernacle or the institution of animal sacrifice that constitutes a compromise, a concession, or a reaction to contingent human needs. On the contrary, the tabernacle was always part of the plan. It was necessary after the revelation of Sinai. The people could never leave Mount Sinai if it meant leaving behind the divine presence that they'd witnessed there. Instead, according to Nachmanides, they'd build a tabernacle that would function as a portable Mount Sinai to continue the encounter between Israel and God as they journeyed on. Right? This was always the plan, calf or no calf. Okay? Now, we could spend a long time debating this medieval debate, right? And there's lots of ink has been spilt about the exact nature of this debate. But the two basic positions, number one, tabernacle as plan A, and number two, tabernacle as a response to the golden calf, both of those positions exist before the medieval period. Both of those positions are represented in the Midrash. That's what interests me. And yet, in its Midrashic setting, the debate is transformed. And that's why I think it reveals something nice about Midrash too. Instead of a debate about the nature and value of animal sacrifice and organized worship, the Midrashim, on both sides of the same formal debate, they seem to have a different interest entirely. They seem more interested in using the narrative as an opportunity to explore the relationship between God, the Torah, and the people. God, the Torah, and the people. If Rashi's right, and the tabernacle was a response to the golden calf, then of course a simple reading of the chronology of the Torah's presentation of events really can't be trusted, right? And then you got to ask, right, could the Torah really be that deceptive? It really doesn't look that way, right? It's not just one paragraph out of place, it's multiple parashiyot, right? What's Rashi's source? Well, Rashi's source is a Midrash. And it's the next source on our handout. It's Midrash Tanhuma. And it says as follows. V'yasuli, it's the last source on page 3 of the handout. V'yasuli mikdash v'shechanti b'tocham. Make for me a tabernacle and I will dwell within them, or within it. But within them is a literal translation for another time. When was this? When were these laws given to Moses? Asks the Midrash. Yom Kippurim atzmo, on Yom Kippur. The Yom Kippur after the sin of the golden calf. Even though it's presented, these laws are presented before the narrative of the golden calf. That's not the order in which they happen. How come? I'm a Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Shalom. So we have a statement of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Shalom, which is this: Ein mukdamu muchar b'Torah, which is that principle. There's don't trust the chronology of the Torah, basically. Well, we've heard Rashi say it. This is its rabbinic source, but where did the rabbis get that from? Well, they bring a verse: Shnema na'uma galotea lo teida, which is a verse from the book of Proverbs, chapter 5. We're going to come back to this verse later and put it into context. But out of context, right, which is how the Midrash takes it, the verse could be translated as follows: lest she should walk the even path of life, her ways wander, na'u magalotea, her ways wander, but she knoweth it not. Says the Midrash, right? Matul latalot hein shivileya shel Torah u'parshioteya. This verse refers to the arrangement of the Torah and its sections. Havei b'yom kippurim ne'emar leMoshe va'asuli mikdash. Behold, it was on Yom Kippur that Moses was told to build a mikdash. Indeed, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, God said, Yavo zahav shebamishkan v'chaper al zahav shena'asa bo et ha'egel. Let them bring gold and build a blinged up tabernacle, right, to atone for the gold of the golden calf. Had it not been for the golden calf, there'd have been no need for the razzmatazz of the tabernacle. But because of the golden calf, right, it was going to just be that earthen stone mizbeah, altar. But now, because of the golden calf, God's making some sort of compromise with them and says, let the gold the tabernacle come and atone for the gold of the golden calf. Shekatuv bo vayit paraku kol ha'am at nizmei zahav. As we see, as soon as God asked the Jewish people to donate, they donated all of their gold for the tabernacle, just like they donated their gold for the egel, right? So the first quote they bring is about the golden calf. They atoned for that with gold. This should be the donation that they take from me. They should take gold. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, said the Holy One, Ki aleh arucha lacha umimakotayich erapaech, which is a verse from Jeremiah, which says, I will restore health unto thee, and I will heal thee of thy wounds. But I think the Midrash is engaging in a kind of clever hermeneutical reading of that verse, which makes it sound like I will heal you with your wound. Your wound was your gold lust, and I'm going to heal you with that wound because I'm going to channel that gold lust into making the tabernacle. Okay, very nice. Okay, the idea is like there are multiple layers here. Layer one, of course, the golden calf happens first because it's clear that the tabernacle is the cure to whatever they did wrong in the golden calf. Because in the golden calf, they gleefully and willfully donated their gold for the purposes of idolatry. And for the tabernacle, they donate their gold to build something for God. So obviously, it's the tabernacle is an atonement for the sin of the golden calf, and therefore, obviously, the commandment didn't come before the sin. And if you're worried about what seems to be the deceptiveness of the order in which the events are presented in the Torah, don't worry, because there's a verse in Proverbs, Na'u magalotea, her footsteps wander, right? Which apparently is a warning to us. The Bible itself warns us not to take the order of the events in which the Torah is presented too literally, because her footsteps wander. Okay, so that's Rashi's source. But what I find, there's a lot that we could talk about in this Midrash, but what I find most remarkable about it is this throwaway reference to the book of Proverbs. Because in order to establish that the sequence of the Torah's narrative cannot be uncritically accepted as a faithful representation of the chronology of events, what did the Midrash do? It seized upon a clause of a verse in the book of Proverbs about meandering footsteps and argues that it's referring to the text of the Torah. But whose meandering footsteps were they in context? To appreciate the audacity of this Midrash, and it really is an audacious Midrash, one has to turn to the relevant chapter of Proverbs and see that verse in context, right? And that's the next source on your handout. Now, the Hebrew of Mishlei is very difficult. I'm just going to read it to you straight into English. My son, listen. This is chapter 5 now of Proverbs, the beginning of chapter 5. Listen to my wisdom. Incline your ear to my insight, that you may have foresight, while your lips hold fast to knowledge. For the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey. Her mouth is smoother than oil, but in the end, she is as bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps take hold of the grave. She does not chart a path of life. Na'u magalotea, her course meanders for lack of knowledge. So now, sons, pay heed to me, and do not swerve from the words of my mouth. Keep yourself far from her. Do not come near the doorway of her house. Now, this chapter is disturbing because it embraces a well-known misogynistic trope that paints the woman as a temptress, right? It goes all the way back to Eve, right? The woman is a temptress who can lead you astray. I think it would be helpful for our purposes if we can to put that misogyny to one side. And one reason you might do that is you might be encouraged by the fact that the other main character of this chapter is wisdom, right? Listen, son, to my wisdom. And wisdom is also personified, and it's personified as a woman in the book of Proverbs, right? For more on that, see chapter 8. So there are actually two women in the book of Proverbs, not just the temptress, but wisdom herself, which is the Torah personified, and she's a woman. And actually more so in a Second Temple work that almost made it into the Hebrew Bible called The Wisdom of Solomon, in which Shlomo HaMelech actually marries wisdom. It's God's wisdom personified as a woman. That text was part of the Greek canon, and I'm not even sure it was ever written in Hebrew. And wisdom there personified as a woman is called Sophia, who Solomon marries as his wife, right? But so if we can put what looks like misogyny to one side, though I recognize that's not easy to do, what becomes most remarkable about the chapter, read through the eyes of our Midrash, is that the temptress who would lead us so terribly astray is, according to Rabbi Yehuda, son of Shalom, nothing other than the text of the Torah, right? The text of the Torah is the woman who would lead you astray. Don't follow her footsteps. Now, what's going on, it seems, is that the Midrash is a polemic against the Sadducees or the Karaites or any other movement in the Jewish world who would deny the authority of the oral Torah, right? It is the wisdom and the traditions of the rabbis that inform us of the true chronology, right? Now, that the laws of the tabernacle were given after the sin of the golden calf, right, is a tradition. It's not there in the text of the Torah, but a simple reading of the written Torah would lead you astray, right? The focus is no longer the local issue of the tabernacle and its relationship to the golden calf, of course, right? The focus is now the nature of the written Torah. It too can become a golden calf, right? You can worship the written word. Like the Sadducees and the Karaites, one can be tempted to worship the written word instead of the wisdom that hides behind it. A wisdom that one has to be careful to listen to and heed. So there's a constant danger that religion will devolve into idolatry, which of course relates to the dangers of what we were talking about last week, theological certainty, fanaticism. The Midrash that teaches us about the real chronology of biblical events contains a coded message against that danger. Don't trust the written text, right? That's a temptress. There are also, of course, so that's the Rashi side of the debate. That's the Midrash that supports Rashi. But there are also Midrashim that take the side of Nachmanides, right? So according to them, the tabernacle wasn't a reaction to the golden calf. And at least at this juncture, the sequence of the biblical narrative is a faithful account of the sequence of actual events. Just as Nachmanides would argue, by the next Midrash we're going to look at, conceives of the tabernacle as just a natural consequence of the revelation at Sinai. Okay. But in the hands of the Midrash we're about to quote, this natural consequence of Sinai has little to do with the merit of the Jewish people, right? Nachmanides says, oh, the Jewish people are so holy now, and they can't walk away from the mountain without God, and God wants to be with them. That's not how the Midrash we're about to look at sees things. Okay. So let's turn to the next Midrash. It's from Shemot Rabbah. This comes from a much longer Midrash, which is talking about different types of commercial acquisitions. Okay. And we get to the following. V'yesh lecha mikach shemi shemacharo nimka imo. There is such a thing, although the translation makes it a question, but I think in context it's just a list of different types. And there is a type of acquisition in which the person who sells it is sold alongside it. Type of acquisition where you buy something, and in purchasing it, you also purchase the salesperson. Right? What's that? Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. The Holy One, blessed be He, said to Israel, Macharti lachem Torati. I sold you my Torah. Kivyachol nimkarti imma. So to speak, I have sold myself alongside her. Shnema, as it says in this week's Parashah, Vayikhu li truma. Right? Take from me a donation. But the Midrash is reading that is, take me. Right? Take me. Something like take me as a donation, or take me along with your donations. Take me. Mashal Melech, there's a parable you could tell of a king. Shahaya lo bat yechida, he had an only daughter. Ba echad min hamlachim untala. Along came a prince, someone from another kingdom, to take her hand in marriage. Bikesh leilech lo la'artso v'litol v'ishto. The young man, the suitor, wanted to take his new bride back home to a foreign land. Amarlo, the king of flesh and blood, said to the prince, Iti shenatati lecha yechiditi. My daughter, whose hand in marriage I've given to you, she's my only daughter. Lifrosh mimena ini yachol. I cannot be separated from her. My love for her is just too immense. I just can't be separated from her. Lo malacha al titla, but for me to tell you, a lawfully wedded husband, not to take her with you, she's your wife. Ella, zo tova seli, do me a little favor, would you? Shekol makom shata holech, everywhere you go, kiton echad asali, make me a little room, right? Sha'ado etzelchem, so I can dwell with you, right? Make sure wherever you go in the world, you build a guest suite so I can come and visit my only daughter, who I can't be parted from. I can't abandon my daughter. Kach amar Kadosh Baruch Hu Israel. So too God said to the Jewish people, Natati lachem et Torah. I gave you the Torah. Lifrosh hemena eini yachol. I cannot be separated from her. She is my daughter. She's Sophia, who Solomon married. She is the woman in the good woman in the book of Proverbs, right? She's my only daughter. I can't be separated from her. Lo malachem al titalu eini yachol. But I can't tell you not to take her, right? She's your wife. Everywhere you go, bite echad asuli. Make me a tabernacle, shadur b'tocha, so I can dwell within it, which is what it says in this week's Parashah, asuli mikdash. Make for me a mikdash. Okay, love this midrash. It's one of my favorite midrashim. Now again, there's also misogyny in this midrash, right? The treatment of women is chattel, right? In this midrash, it shouldn't be ignored. It can't be ignored. You say, you purchased my daughter, and notwithstanding that, I think it would be a shame to miss what I think is a profound and very beautiful religious truth at its heart, right? A remarkable feature of Jewish history is how we have thrived in every setting into which we've been thrust. We really have. Exile, expulsions, crusades, blood libels, pogroms, a Holocaust. And despite the unfathomable toll they took, they always failed to subdue us for long. Right? Time and time again, Jewish communities arrived as refugees in a foreign land, and they thrived. You don't expect to see high rates of literacy or social mobility, let alone a grossly disproportionate number of Nobel Prizes among the disenfranchised or those fresh off the boat. And you may ask, and many have asked, what is the secret of this uncanny ability to thrive? And one could, and some have, looked for an answer in terms of a genetic or racial endowment, but I reject that forcefully with two hands, right? In that direction, one finds xenophobic prejudice, hiding behind a veneer, science, or something like that. The crucial difference between, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of Midrash, but this is Midrash on Midrash, but the crucial difference between the Jewish people and others is that we have the Torah. An observance of Torah law created in the Jewish people a completely portable culture that placed family and education at its heart. In the words of Rabbi Sachs, it created a culture who, this is a quote from Rabbi Sachs, whose heroes are teachers, whose citadels are houses of study, and whose passion is education and the life of the mind. Even after swathes of Jews became secular, the values of the Torah, such as family and literacy, remained close to their heart. And we were privileged to receive the Torah, and more than we kept it, the Torah kept us, as Moses told us millennia ago. And this is a quote from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 4, verse 6. He said, observe the laws of the Torah faithfully, for it is your wisdom and your discernment in the eyes of other nations, who on hearing all these laws will say, surely that great nation is a wise and discerning people. I have never believed, right? I'm going on this long tangent because I've never believed that the doctrine of the Jewish election, that we are the chosen people, is something to take special pride in. Because first of all, God has a special relation with every person and is open to special relationships with multiple nations. If you find that hard to believe, see, for example, the book of Isaiah, chapter 19, verse 25, when God talks about his special relationship with Egypt, believe it or not, and his special relationship with Assyria, believe it or not. Second, the election was supposed to serve all the people of the world, right? We were chosen to be a blessing to the world. Through you, all the peoples of the world will be blessed. Genesis 12, verse 3. There were even voices in the tradition who said that we were chosen to have the Torah because of how unruly we were. If you're interested in that line of thought, that's in Masechet Beitza, Hey Bet, folio 25b. Just read you a quick translation of it. It was taught in the name of Rabbi Meir. Why was the Torah given to the Jewish people? Because they are impudent, because of their chutzpah. The ways of these people are fire, as were it not for the Torah, were it not for the fact that the Torah was given to them, they would consume the world. No nation or tongue could withstand them, right? So it's not always seen, it's not always, you know, in the words of Topol in Tevier in Fiddler on the Roof, I know we're the chosen people, but why do you have to choose us so often? Being chosen isn't necessarily, you know, the best thing, right? We don't have the Torah because we're great enough to deserve it. Rather, to the extent that we manifest greatness, it's because we have the Torah. I'm going to try and make this point and show you that this is what the Midrash is saying. Okay, I'm telling you the point first. I'm going to try and read it back in the Midrash later. Okay. You see, our Midrash is about God as father-in-law. I hope you see that. The Torah declares that the Jews are the children of God. Banimatem, right? You are children to God. That's Deuteronomy 14, verse 1. But our Midrash qualifies that and says, not quite. You're not actually God's children. You're more like his children-in-law, right? To the extent that we manifest any greatness, to the extent that we have a special relationship with God himself, it's because we have a relationship with God's daughter, right? Typically, a relationship between a father-in-law and a son or daughter-in-law is only going to flourish to the extent that the underlying relationship between husband and wife is flourishing too. Thank God I'm very close to my father-in-law. But if it weren't for my wife, I wouldn't know him. And if, God forbid, relations between my wife and I became, you know, really irreparably toxic, I imagine that would be the end of my healthy relationship with my father-in-law too, okay? we think, and this is the way Nachmanides presents it, God wants to dwell in our midst. We're holy now. We're his people, right? After all, we were commanded to build a tabernacle. He wants to dwell with us. But according to the Midrash, that's only true to the extent that we hold fast to God's Torah. Okay? The Torah makes us great, and it's a great responsibility, and it's to the extent that we hold on to it, we have a relationship with God. So what I've tried to do is present this medieval machloket about when were the commands to build the Mishkan received, into a very different machloket when shone through the prism of the Midrash, right? Because we started with this debate between Rashi and Nachmanides. The question was when exactly was Moses told to build the tabernacle? And I think in their hands, the question leads to a debate about the nature, role, and value of worship. Okay. For Maimonides, any mode of worship is some sort of compromise with the mores and sensibilities of a given culture at a given time. So that's how you design a set of worship, a kind of a regimen of ritual. You design it with a particular culture, a particular time in mind. Okay. According to Nachmanides, that's not true at all. Okay. According to Nachmanides, the idea to build a tabernacle of exactly these proportions, from exactly these materials, and to sacrifice the precise sacrificial rites that are laid out extensively towards the end of the book of Exodus, but more so throughout the book of Leviticus. That was plan A. Indeed, Nachmanides is a strong adherent of the view that the Torah, in something quite close to its current form, was written before the creation of the world, right? So this was always the plan, okay? And the tabernacle was part of that, okay? And that's going to lead him, if you're interested, you go and look at Nachmanides' commentary to the book of Leviticus. He's going to say there's nothing arbitrary about the dimensions of the tabernacle. You'll see that in Exodus 2, in his commentary on Exodus. But there's nothing arbitrary about the choreography of the rituals of the ceremonies of sacrifice. Okay, every single bit, why this bit is slaughtered here, and why this part of blood is brought here, and why these ingredients are in the incense, and why it's this animal for this sort of thing, and that animal for this sort of, everything is steeped in deep meaning. And had it been some other way, it wouldn't have carried the same, essential messages. Maimonides, by contrast, on the other extreme, is quite happy to accept that some of these things may just be arbitrary, right? There needs to be a size, there needs to be colors, there needs to be, but like which ones? B, Maimonides thinks that most of the details, to the extent that they are not arbitrary, are just a response to the idolatry of the time. Either in part, an accommodation with the deep need that people had for animal sacrifices, or B, a rejection of certain idolatrous creeds. So we slaughter the animals we do because those are the animals that were worshipped by people around us, and we, we don't eat milk in meat because in the ceremonies of pagan cults in the ancient Near East, meat would be cooked or stewed in the milk of its mother, right? So that's the Maimonidean extreme. And then you've got Rashi in the middle, says no, there was always going to be some notion of animal sacrifice, and therefore there's no reason to think that that's some sort of accommodation with a cultural more or need, because straight after Sinai, God said, build me that earthen Mizbeach, altar, or make one out of stone, but in an unhewn way. And wherever you go, you can sacrifice and call on my name and I'll be there. No reason to think that's a cultural compromise or accommodation. Where compromise or accommodation happens, according to Rashi, is after the sin of the golden calf. What God, so to speak, sees, according to Rashi, is that we have a kind of a gold lust. It would be appropriate, actually, to perhaps just worship God in nature. And we don't need to have these big cathedrals and monuments to in which to choreograph our ritual. We can just do it outside with natural things. But to the extent that we are possessed by this gold lust, at least we can channel it into something good. I suppose better to channel all of that labor and money into the building of, I'm saying cathedrals, but synagogues, great, beautiful synagogues, than into, sports stadiums in which gladiators will fight one another, right? If you must have your impressive architecture, then at least, put it towards a spiritual need. But in the hands of the Midrash, this question about chronology is tied to a very different debate. It's not tied to a debate about what are our needs in worship, okay, and what was plan A and plan B for worship. In the Midrashic imagination, right, it seems to me that both sides are interested in counseling us against chauvinism. On the one hand, there's a religious chauvinism that looks to scripture and takes itself to have all of the answers, right? But scripture without wisdom is a dangerous temptress. So yeah, the Midrash says, oh, by the way, the tabernacle was a response to the sin of the golden calf. But let me tell you what's really interesting. What's really interesting here is that you shouldn't trust the chronology of the Torah. And why shouldn't you trust the chronology of the Torah? Because her footsteps meander, right? And that's what the Midrash is doing. And that's where the threat of idolatry lies. The threat of idolatry lies in idolizing the text. On the other hand, the other Midrash says, no, there's a nationalistic chauvinism that looks to the selection of the Jews, the election, so to speak, of the Jews, and to our national triumph as sources of pride, racial pride, nationalistic pride. But along comes the Midrash and says, no, God isn't our father at all. He's our father-in-law. And the only reason he dwells in our midst, and the only reason he commands us to build a tabernacle is because we have his Torah. And to the extent that we alienate ourselves from his Torah, we alienate ourselves from him, and we're not special. The successes that we have are never ours alone. So that's like a very different focus, despite the question being the same question. When were these laws revealed? But as that question is answered by opposing sides in the medieval context, you have a debate that's about the nature of worship. And as that same question is answered in a midrashic concept, it seems like both sides of the debate are more interested in some sort of discourse about the dangers of various forms of chauvinism or confidence. There we go. Any questions, comments? We have 60 seconds. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I will hand you back to Lily Naz. So those of you in New York, I might see you at Yeshiva University on Thursday evening at the Sforim sale. But if not, I will see you Sunday at 1 p.m. For next week's installment.
Wow, thank you so much, Rabbi Lebens. I I'm always amazed at the huge questions we managed to tackle in just 1 hour. And today, not only through Midrashic literature, but also medieval. Thank you. Oh, I think Gabriella has a question or a comment before we go. You're welcome to unmute yourself, Gabriella.
Yeah, I don't know if you can answer it in 60 seconds, but regarding like the Rashi approach that says that it's out of order and the Midrash Tanchuma, like what would the reason be? Like I understand the idea of like ein mukdam mechaber Torah, but is there an explanation given as why?
That is a very good question. You're absolutely right, and this is one of the reasons why Nachmanides so forcefully rejects it. Nachmanides knows about this midrash, and he knows that there is a principle, ein muchav mukdam b'Torah. You don't have to follow the chronology of the Torah, and there are rare occasions in which he uses this principle himself. But if you employ this principle, you have to explain, why did the Torah not present it in order? And if you don't have a theory as to why the Torah didn't present it in order, don't invoke the principle. And so you're right, Rashi owes us that. I don't have off the cuff an answer to you, but it is the right question. And I think that to fill out Rashi's position, we are owed an explanation as to why as to why this particular parsha is out of order in the way it is. So it's a much better question, Gabriella, than I can answer, than I can provide an answer for.
I see. Thank you.
But work on it. You write something up and send it to us.
Okay, I'll work on it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Potentially New Yorkers, see you at the Sforim sale on Thursday, and everyone else, see you at our class next Sunday for our 4th session of this class. If you're interested in other classes that Drisha is running, such as our online Yiddish translation workshop with Mr. Daniel Kraft starting this week, you can go to drisha.org and check out all those amazing classes. Thank you very much.
Bye.